The headlights cut through the darkness of the deserted road ahead, illuminating a narrow stretch of asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to stay focused as exhaustion weighed on me. The silence inside the car only amplified the sense of isolation. Emily sat next to me, her head resting against the window, staring out into the nothingness. We had been on the road for hours, driving back from a long weekend with friends. All I wanted was to get home and collapse into my bed. The clock on the dashboard showed 2:15 a.m., and the road felt endless, like we were stuck in some kind of limbo. "Are you okay?" I asked, breaking the silence, my voice quieter than usual. "Yeah, just tired," she replied, not taking her eyes off the darkness outside. "I can't wait to get home either." I knew exactly how she felt. The exhaustion weighed heavily on us, making every minute on the road a struggle. I looked out at the dark horizon ahead and felt a chill run down my spine. The empty road, surrounded by trees and endless shadows, created a discomfort I couldn't quite explain. "We should have taken a different route," I muttered, trying to sound casual, but something inside me felt uneasy. Maybe it was the silence or the loneliness of the deserted road, but something felt off. Emily nodded but didn't say anything. The silence returned as we continued down the deserted road. The wind outside hissed against the windows, and I couldn't shake the growing discomfort creeping over me. Something wasn't right, but I tried to push that feeling aside. Maybe it was just the fatigue talking. Just a few more miles, and we'd be home. Then I saw it. A man, standing by the side of the road, frantically waving next to a car with its hood up. Without thinking, I took my foot off the gas and slowed down. "Should we stop?" Emily asked, a hint of hesitation in her voice. I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to keep driving, but the other part, well, it wasn't something you could just ignore. "I don't know. It could be dangerous. He looks like he needs help," Emily insisted, looking at me with that compassion I knew so well. She had a big heart, bigger than mine, and always wanted to help, no matter the situation. As we passed by the man's car slowly, I got a better look at him. He seemed nervous, almost desperate. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was something in his eyes that didn't sit well with me. Still, Emily was convinced we should help. "He's alone," she said. "I don't think he's a threat," I sighed, fighting against my instinct to just keep driving. But I didn't want to argue, not at that moment. I pulled over onto the shoulder, a few meters away from where he stood. "Okay, but let's make it quick." As soon as we got out of the car, the cold of the early morning wrapped around us, and I could see the man rushing toward us, his face twisted with worry. Thank you. Thank you so much for stopping. My car broke down, and I don't know what to do. Could you give me a ride to the nearest town?" My first reaction was to say no, but something made me hesitate. It wasn't just the tone of his voice. It was the way he spoke, as if he was trying to convince us of something. I glanced at Emily, trying to gauge her reaction. "Maybe we could call a tow truck for you," I started to say, but he interrupted me before I could finish. "Please, just a quick ride." "It won't take long," he insisted, glancing nervously at his car. "Please, get in my car. The battery is still working. I can explain everything." A shiver ran down my spine. Something was definitely wrong. My mind was already on high alert. Something about this guy didn't add up. The urgency, the way he insisted that we get into his car. It was like he was trying to force us to do something we didn't want to. "Emily, let's get back to our car," I said calmly, trying not to sound too alarmed, but there was a firmness in my tone. I just needed her to realize what I was already feeling. This was a bad idea. She hesitated for a moment, still with that compassionate look in her eyes, but something in my voice made her react. She nodded slowly, and we began to move away from the man. As I kept Emily close to me, something caught my attention in his car. There was a shadow in the back seat, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My eyes focused on that shape, and then, with my heart racing, I realized we weren't alone. There was someone hiding in the back seat. My instinct screamed to get out of there as fast as possible. "Emily, now," I whispered, pulling her more firmly. She sensed the fear in my voice and finally understood the gravity of the situation. The man was still trying to follow us, now more desperate. "Don't leave. Please," he shouted, his voice sounding less like a cry for help and more like a command. I was already unlocking the doors of our car, quickly getting Emily into the passenger seat. I gave the man one last glance as I ran to the driver's side. He was getting closer, and his face, once twisted with concern, now showed something more sinister. And then I looked again at his car. The shadow in the back seat moved, confirming my worst fear. There was someone else in there. Someone waiting. I jumped into the car, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. "Let's get out of here now," I said, almost breathless. Emily was already buckling her seatbelt, no longer questioning anything. The panic was palpable in the air, and suddenly, what seemed like an innocent act of kindness had turned into a desperate escape. There was no more room for hesitation. We just wanted to survive. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hesitated for a second, and in that brief moment, I felt like I was about to break down. The man was only a few meters away, his voice now an unintelligible scream. All I wanted was for the car to start and to get us out of there. The engine finally roared to life, and I slammed on the accelerator. The tires screeched, the car jerked forward, and in an instant, we were speeding down the deserted road. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the man standing in the middle of the road, his figure growing smaller as we pulled away. "Did you see that?" Emily finally managed to ask, still breathless. She stared straight ahead, trying to process everything. "I did," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. There was someone in the back seat of his car. We were about to fall into a trap. Emily turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "A trap? How do you know?" I knew she was in shock, just like I was, because everything about that guy was wrong. The way he insisted, the way he wanted us to get in his car, and that shadow in the back seat. They were waiting for us. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart was still pounding, and the road ahead seemed to stretch on forever. The darkness no longer felt like just a backdrop, but a constant threat, as if something could still jump out at any moment. "That was close," Emily murmured, more to herself than to me. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. Way too close. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and although we were far from that man and his car, the fear lingered. It wasn't just the memory of what almost happened, but the realization that if we hadn't caught on in time, things could have ended very differently. We drove in silence, trying to process what had just happened. The relief of having escaped was mixed with the terror that still clung to us, like an invisible shadow. No matter how fast we drove, something inside me told me that the fear of that night wouldn't leave us anytime soon. As we put more distance between us and that deserted road, the silence inside the car became unbearable. My body was still tense, and my mind kept racing, trying to make sense of how we had come so close to something so dangerous. I stared straight ahead at the road, but the images of the night kept playing over and over in my head. Do you think they were together? The guy and the person in the back seat? Emily broke the silence with a shaky voice, echoing the question I had been asking myself. They definitely were, I replied. That guy knew we were starting to figure things out, which is why he got so insistent. They were ready to do something as soon as we got in that car. Emily ran her hands over her face, visibly shaken. I can't believe we almost fell for it. It seemed so innocent at first. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to control my own frustration. You couldn't have known. They played on that, on the fact that we're wired to help when someone's in trouble. But this time it was a trap. The silence returned, but now it was different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of two tired travelers, but the kind of silence that comes after something terrifying, when words don't seem enough to process what happened. As the lights of the road began to appear on the horizon, signaling that we were finally approaching the city, I felt the tension in my body ease a little. We were safe, at least for now, but what had almost happened would stay with us for a long time. I'm never stopping for someone like that again, Emily finally said, her voice firm, though still shaky. I glanced at her for a moment and nodded. Me neither. What remained now was a mix of relief and a lingering dread, as if a shadow followed us, even though we were far from that man and his accomplice. We had come too close to something that, if we had made one mistake, could have changed our lives forever. I turned my attention back to the road, firmly resolved to never let something like this happen again. I had spent my life on the road, but this delivery felt different from the start. My boss called at the end of the shift, a short call, straight to the point. A special cargo. It must be delivered before dawn in a small town, a place I had never even heard of. It wasn't unusual for them to ask for urgency in night deliveries, but his tone left me suspicious. When I arrived at the depot, the atmosphere was already strange. No one seemed willing to talk much. I signed the paperwork as usual, and when I went to check what I was carrying, a thick tarp covered everything, as if they wanted to hide even from the driver what was inside. The instructions were clear. No unnecessary stops, direct delivery, and no questions. I hit the road. The night was cold and empty, typical of a long stretch of isolated highway. Only the constant sound of the engine and the glow of the headlights cutting through the darkness. I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind me seemed to stretch infinitely, deserted, almost comforting in its tranquility. But something felt off, and I knew it. In my line of work, you learn to trust your instincts. I tried to shake off the unease, focusing only on the road, but the feeling that something was wrong lingered with me. After a few hours on the road, fatigue began to set in. But that's when I noticed the first sign that this trip wasn't going to be as smooth as I had hoped. In the rearview mirror, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, small and indistinct, the kind of thing that normally doesn't catch your attention. But those headlights were flashing, blinking on and off intermittently. At first, I thought it was just a car with electrical problems. I kept driving, focused on my destination, but the car stayed there, at a safe distance, as if it was following me. It bothered me, but I kept driving, thinking it was just a coincidence. It's probably nothing, I thought. However, the longer I drove, the more obvious it became that the car maintained the same distance, repeating the same flashing light pattern. The situation grew uncomfortable enough that I decided to change routes. I took an exit, a side road, and for a moment, I thought I had lost the car. But a few minutes later, there it was again. The flashing headlights, as if they were sending me a message. Now, my heart was beating faster. The feeling that I wasn't alone had become real, and the initial discomfort was growing inside me. Whoever was driving that car wasn't just passing by. They were after me, and it didn't seem like they were going to stop anytime soon. I knew I needed to get rid of that car. It was no longer just a coincidence. It was clear that the driver was chasing me. I decided to try another strategy. I changed routes again, this time to an even more deserted road, a back road that few drivers knew about. I drove faster now, trying to create distance between us. The car's headlights disappeared for a moment, and I finally breathed a little easier. Maybe I had managed to shake them off, but the peace didn't last long. A few minutes later, there they were again, the flashing headlights reappearing at a safe distance. I was being hunted, no doubt about it now. The question was, why? The winding road didn't offer many places to stop, but I found a small rest area and decided to pull over. I needed to think. Maybe, if I stopped and faced whoever was in that car, things would resolve themselves. But as I turned off the engine and waited, the car never showed up. The highway around me was silent, and there was no sign of movement. After a few minutes, I got out of the cab and walked around the truck. Everything seemed normal, but my mind wasn't at ease. I felt a growing tension. I got back behind the wheel, determined to continue the trip without any more interruptions. As I drove, the car reappeared. This time, closer. The headlights flickered in irregular intervals, almost frantically. I knew I was running out of options. Something about this chase was wrong. I needed to stay calm and think of a way to handle this. When I stopped at a gas station to fill up, I took the chance to stretch my legs and try to calm my nerves. The place was deserted, as expected in the middle of the night. Only the distant sound of a radio playing inside the convenience store and the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above me broke the silence. While the tank was filling, I started a quick inspection of the truck, something I always did on long trips. When I reached the back, my stomach dropped. Fresh footprints were marked in the mud around the wheels, tracks that definitely weren't there when I left the truck earlier. Someone had approached while I was resting. With a trembling hand, I checked the cargo door. It was slightly open. It had happened silently, without me noticing, while I had tried to lose the car earlier. Whoever was following me had tampered with the truck. Now, fear started to take over me. It wasn't just the chase on the road anymore. There was a closer, more tangible threat. My mind raced with possibilities. What was in the cargo? And why was this pursuer so interested in it? I decided to secure the door tightly before getting back on the road. But the unease had already settled in. This was definitely a trip that was going off course. And the feeling that something worse was about to happen was almost palpable. Back on the road, every mile felt longer than the last. The discomfort in my gut only grew stronger. I was on high alert, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, waiting to see those flashing headlights again. And, like clockwork, they appeared. This time, the car was closer than ever, so close that I could make out a shadow behind the headlights. They weren't just following me anymore. Now, it seemed like they wanted to push me off the road. The car sped up, tailing my truck, the headlights flashing frantically. Adrenaline flooded my veins as I fought to keep the wheel steady. The pursuer began bumping into the back of the truck, as if trying to provoke an accident. The winding road didn't give me much room to maneuver. I tried to speed up, but driving a truck at high speed at night wasn't simple. The car kept getting more aggressive, forcing me to make quick decisions. My hands were sweating as I made maneuvers to keep the truck on the road. Then, the car tried a risky move, attempting to cut me off from the left. The car swerved right, then left again, as if trying to force me to brake or swerve. I knew that if I hit the brakes too hard, I could lose control and flip the truck. The tension mounted with each move I made. Every second felt like an eternity. I took a deep breath, determined not to let fear take over. It was a matter of survival now, and I had to keep my head cool. Amid all the chaos, an idea hit me hard. What if this chase had nothing to do with me, but with what I was carrying? The cargo I had accepted without question, just following orders, now seemed to have a much heavier burden than just simple merchandise. My heart raced with this new revelation. The car's behavior, the attempt to force an accident, the mysterious footprints near the truck. Everything was starting to make sense. The pursuer wasn't just trying to scare me. They wanted what I was transporting. But what was so valuable or dangerous that it justified this insane chase? My mind raced for answers. I remembered the vague instructions and the strange behavior of the man who had arranged the cargo. He hadn't given me any specific details about what was in the container. He had just told me to deliver it before dawn and, most importantly, not to ask any questions. Now, I was wondering if I had made a mistake by accepting that job. The truck felt like a trap, and I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I needed to find out what was inside. But stopping again to investigate seemed impossible, given what was happening on the road. The only certainty was that this car wasn't going to give up, and the longer I waited to act, the more dangerous the situation would become. The pursuer was getting bolder, forcing the truck toward the edge of the road. I knew I was in a critical situation, and if I didn't act soon, the truck would spin out of control. My mind raced, trying to think of a solution. I needed to use what I had, the size and weight of the truck. A vehicle of this size had its disadvantages in speed, but it was practically unbeatable in terms of strength. With the car getting closer, trying to overtake on the left, I made a risky move. I slammed on the brakes hard for just a moment, making the truck slow down abruptly. The car behind didn't have time to react, and when I hit the accelerator again, it was already stuck against the back of the truck. I had cornered the pursuer. The car got caught on the side, scraping violently against the truck. The sound of metal against metal was deafening, and the force of the collision made my truck shudder. The car finally veered off the road, spinning out of control and crashing in a cloud of dust and lights going out. My heart was still racing, and my hands were sweating on the wheel. I didn't have time to celebrate. The truck was intact, but I knew I couldn't stop. They could come back, or worse, they could be waiting for me further down the road. The road ahead was empty, but I knew the real fight wasn't over yet. I kept driving, now with the silence of the road and the constant hum of the engine as my only companions. The fear was beginning to fade, but the tension remained. I knew I wasn't out of danger yet. The cargo I was transporting was still a mystery, and the events of the night only confirmed that there was something much more serious at play. I passed through a few small towns, but I didn't stop. The dim lights of the houses passed like ghosts on the edge of my vision, while I focused only on reaching the final destination. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, slowly illuminating the road ahead. Relief started to mix with exhaustion. When I finally arrived at the small town mentioned in the instructions, I drove straight to the delivery point. It was a simple warehouse, seemingly abandoned, but clearly waiting for that cargo. The man who had hired me appeared at the door, a dark smile on his face. We didn't exchange many words. I got out of the truck, ready to leave everything behind. But something inside me knew that this wasn't really over. I left the town, still with the feeling that I had narrowly escaped. I decided right then and there that I would never accept a job again without knowing exactly what I was carrying. The road may be lonely, but there are some things better left untouched, especially at night. The sound of my luggage hitting the asphalt echoed through the small bus station. I was exhausted. The semester had finally ended, and all I wanted was to get home as quickly as possible. Dragging my books and clothes through trains and buses felt like an eternity, so I decided to try something different, a shared ride. The app was reliable, with good reviews, and honestly, it was the cheapest option. It was just a matter of sharing the ride with a stranger. No big deal, right? Shortly after I stood on the sidewalk, a black sedan pulled up. The car looked new, gleaming under the streetlights. The driver, a friendly-looking man in his 30s, smiled as he lowered the window. "You're Daniel, right?" he asked, and I nodded, relieved I didn't have to wait any longer. He got out of the car and opened the trunk so I could put my things inside. "I'm Mike. Nice to meet you." The trip seemed calm at first. Mike was friendly, chatty, and kept the atmosphere light. We talked about random things, sports, college, and the trips he often took. I relaxed, sinking into the comfortable seat, watching the city lights fade into the horizon. The steady hum of the engine mixed with the quiet night, and I let my guard down. "So, what do you study again?" Mike asked casually. "History, but I'm thinking about changing majors," I answered, not too invested in the conversation. Sleep was starting to weigh on me. Little did I know that would be the last time I felt comfortable on that trip. "History, huh?" Mike murmured, keeping his eyes on the road for longer than I expected. "I bet you have a family that loves hearing all those stories, right? Do you live with your parents?" The question caught me off guard. He had asked a few things about college, but now he was getting into more personal territory. I glanced out the window, watching the streetlights and houses become increasingly spaced out. "Yeah, I live with them," I replied hesitantly. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe it was just harmless curiosity. The road was getting darker, the trees around us becoming distant shadows speeding by. I tried to ignore the slight discomfort forming in my stomach, but couldn't help checking my phone's GPS to make sure we were on the right track. The route seemed normal, but we were starting to veer off the main highway. Do you know these roads well?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mike smiled but didn't take his eyes off the road. "Yeah, I drive this way all the time. In fact, I know a shortcut. It'll shave off at least half an hour. Want to see?" Something about his voice didn't sit right. I knew I should say no, but I didn't want to seem paranoid either. The feeling that something was wrong kept growing. Sure, I murmured, the unease turning into mild tension. The car started to move off the main route, and the road lights almost completely disappeared. As the car continued down narrower, darker roads, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The houses had vanished completely, replaced by vast fields and endless rows of trees stretching as far as the car's headlights could reach. The silence outside was almost suffocating. I tried to stay calm, but the tension grew with every passing minute. I glanced at the GPS again, and now we were far off the main route. My heart began to race. I had to say something. "Are you sure this is the fastest way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but the concern was hard to hide. Mike gave me a half-smile without taking his eyes off the road. "Absolutely. I've taken this way before. Relax. We'll hit the main highway again soon." That did nothing to ease my nerves. In fact, it only made my growing sense of danger worse. I gripped my phone tightly, trying to find a way out of this situation without alarming him. I checked the signal. No service. Great. The car kept moving through the darkness, and now there were no distant house lights or street lamps in sight. The silence in the car was broken only by the steady hum of the engine. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe he really was just trying to save time. Maybe I was overreacting. But the increasing sense of danger wouldn't leave my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to control my thoughts. But when I looked at Mike again, I saw something in his face that made me even more nervous. He was avoiding looking at me completely. Something had changed in him. It was then that I started wondering, what would I do if I was really in danger? What if he wasn't the friendly driver he seemed to be? The discomfort that had once been just a whisper at the back of my mind had now turned into a growing certainty. I was in danger. The way Mike kept his eyes fixed on the road, ignoring any attempt I made to start a conversation, made me feel like something more sinister was at play. Every time I glanced at him, my heart raced a little faster. The questions he had asked earlier, which once seemed like harmless curiosity, now felt invasive. He knew more about me than I ever wanted to share with someone I had just met an hour ago. When I tried to break the silence, my voice came out weaker than I had expected. "So, does this shortcut go through any familiar places? We're pretty far from the main highway now." He hesitated, and it was in that moment that my anxiety spiked. He paused for too long before responding. "You seem a little nervous, man. Everything okay?" The way he spoke sent chills down my spine. He wasn't concerned. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying my unease. I was being watched, assessed. His calmness was unsettling. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to mask my fear. "Just curious." As my eyes scanned the car's interior, I forced myself to think of an escape plan. But what could I do? We were on a deserted road, in the middle of nowhere. There was no phone signal, and jumping out of a moving car seemed like a death sentence. I had to be smart. I had to get out of that car before it was too late. The car slowed down, turning off the main road onto a poorly lit dirt path. My heart pounded. There was absolutely nothing around us, just dense trees and the pitch-black night. When Mike finally stopped the car, the engine went silent, and the only sound left was my heavy breathing. "What are we doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the fear was undeniable. Mike slowly turned to face me, a disconcerting smile forming on his face. "Just a quick stop. I need to fix something in the trunk. Won't take long." He got out of the car before I could say anything else. I watched as he calmly walked to the back of the vehicle. The darkness swallowed him momentarily, and in that instant, my body tensed up. Adrenaline surged through me, and my survival instinct screamed that I needed to get out of there. I thought quickly of possible escape routes. I discreetly unlocked the door, trying not to make any noise. Mike was outside, but I didn't know how much time I had before he returned. My mind raced in 1,000 directions, trying to find a solution. If I tried to run, he'd catch me. But if I did nothing, I knew I'd be at his mercy. I had to buy some time, distract him somehow. That's when I had an idea. "Hey, Mike," I called out, pretending to struggle with my breathing. "I don't feel too well. Maybe it's the motion of the car or something." I heard his slow footsteps approaching, and for a moment, fear overtook me. If he realized I was lying, I'd be completely vulnerable. But I had to take the risk. He stopped by the door, opening it with a smile that made me feel nauseous. "It's all right. We'll figure this out together." As soon as Mike leaned closer, my body reacted without thinking. With a quick movement, I slammed the door into his chest. He stumbled backward, completely caught off guard. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I bolted from the car, running as fast as my legs could carry me. The cold night air hit my face as my feet pounded against the uneven dirt road. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get as far away as possible. Mike's footsteps echoed behind me. He was chasing me. "Get back here," he yelled, his voice filled with anger. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't stop. Every step felt heavier, and the rough terrain made my escape even more difficult. My mind was in chaos, and I had no plan. Just the certainty that I couldn't let him catch me. The sound of his footsteps seemed to be getting closer. Fear coursed through my veins like electricity, pushing me forward. Desperately, I looked around for any sign of light, any hope of help. And then, in the distance, I saw it. Headlights. A car was coming down the road, my only chance of escape. With my heart nearly bursting from my chest, I ran toward the light, praying I would reach it in time. With every step, the sound of the approaching car became my only hope. I could hear the engines rumble in the distance, and that gave me the strength I needed to keep going. Mike was right behind me, his heavy breathing echoing through the night. When I finally reached the middle of the road, the car's headlights illuminated my body. Desperate, I waved my arms frantically, trying to get the driver's attention. The car slowed down, and at that moment, I heard Mike's footsteps stop. He had frozen, realizing he couldn't continue without being seen. The driver rolled down the window. It was a woman, her face filled with concern. "What's going on?" she asked. Out of breath, I managed to mutter, "Help me." "He tried to get me." She didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door, and I quickly got inside, feeling the safety of the vehicle's interior. I glanced back and saw Mike standing at the edge of the road, his fists clenched, his expression dark as he disappeared into the shadows when the car began to accelerate. I was safe, but the sense of danger still pulsed through my body. That night, I learned that blindly trusting strangers could be fatal. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed the stories, leave a comment. Your feedback is really important to us. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.